Welcome to The Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, the Shrink, and here's my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
And the rabbi and I are honored and excited to have with us Scott Mason. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Glad to have you, Scott.
Thank you.
Well, the rabbi found Scott through a friend, and he has this amazing podcast and this amazing worldview, and he has the Purpose Highway. Fits right along with what the rabbi and I are trying to do and working on. So why don't you speak? I mean, I could say all sorts of things about you, but I think you speak so compellingly and so clearly to help people think about things in a way to find meaning and connection. So why Purpose Highway?
I appreciate that, because we are on a road to a future that is unimaginable. It's my thesis and the thesis of this show that we are in the middle of a silent revolution of thought, the most profound perhaps in the entire history of humanity, but no one's talking about it. And that is a complete change in the way that human beings are connecting to each other in their search for meaning. The historical institutions that have provided people with a sense of connection as they seek their purpose, as they seek an ethical foundation, and as they seek spirituality, are in dramatic shift. Many are in decline. Others are utterly and completely changing. At the same time, people are emerging that are creating and forging whole new pathways to find that connection to purpose or ethical foundations or spirituality. The future of thought is with those. With the change in the thinking about purpose, ethics, spirituality, and meaning itself, people have been feeling alienated. But what I'm trying to do is explore a world where there are new movements for connection for those seeking meaning. It's a powerful place to be, and that's why I feel so connected to what you all are doing.
And we felt the same way. Scott. Well, I'm sorry, Rabbi.
No, that's fine. In biblical Hebrew, there are 8 words that translate some sort of joy or happiness. And when you look at the etymology, the root meaning, every single one of them has some connotation of purpose or progress. And instead of pursuing happiness, we should be pursuing purpose, because that will allow happiness to emerge naturally.
Absolutely. Real power there.
And as a psychologist, one thing I've always said is you cannot have happiness as a goal. Happiness instead is a byproduct of good choices. It's a byproduct of the way we think about ourselves and others and the context in which we find ourselves. So Scott Mason, you're on this mission. Tell us about it. What can everyone out there do? We have a fiercely loyal and small audience that's regular, that's live, and even more that watch it after. What can they do to join you on this Purpose Highway?
I think the first thing that they should do is actually listen to the episodes, starting with season 2. One of the episodes had the rabbi on it. By the way, that conversation got an extremely strong positive response. We have other individuals in the ethics space coming up, including some you all might know as guests in the future. And then I think with that, begin to look and also listen to some of the guests who talk about what pathways to meaning in a new world might look like for themselves. To be honest, to begin to engage with each other, perhaps others that are listening to the show who you can find through social media, and have these conversations. I'm in the process of developing some additional thinking about how the community that has begun to build around this can crystallize a little bit more. So simply by following the show, becoming engaged with others that are walking in the path. And by the way, engaging with people that they meet, as I'm sure they do here, on other similarly themed shows, to begin to create a community of their own. You're making enormous first steps.
Well, it seems to be that you were born to this. You were born with this calling of biracial, LGBTQ, child adopted by Middle Americans that happen to be African Americans in a mostly white social milieu. You grew up outside of any conceivable social box. I'm quoting you because I can't say any better than how you wrote it on your website. I mean, you write so compellingly, sir.
I love you.
And I think that the whole idea, you've been successful in business and in government and everywhere else. And so now you're here working on changing minds. Rabbi, what moved you about his purpose highway? Because I know it struck a chord with you, sir.
Well, I already talked about the focus on purpose.
Yes.
I go back to Hebrew grammar and language. The word for love in Hebrew is ahavo, which comes from the root hav, which means to give. Because when we invest ourselves in others, whether it's people, communities, or purpose, so we become emotionally attached and engaged. And beyond that, it's related to the word lahava, which means flame. Now, why flame? Because a flame, two things about a flame. One is the shape. It's broad at the base and it tapers to a point, which means you have two people that are different from one another or apart, because the best partnerships, as the doctor and I know, the best partnerships are people who are not alike, but who have a common sense of purpose. We're going in the right direction. We're going on the same path. And the other wonderful thing about a flame is that it's one of the only things you can give away without giving up. One candle can light 1,000 candles, and now you have a whole radiance of light without losing anything in the process. And what I've seen from you, Scott, is this tremendous enthusiasm that is infectious. When I'm a little bit staid and reserved. And when I was on your show, I just became so energetic. And that's the way it should be. And as we should rub off on other people and in ways that make us all better.
What an incredible statement. It is amazing. And it's interesting. I love that flame analogy. I may have to use that. Credit will be given because it's genius.
Not
but I do, whoever said, one of the things that I believe about relationships and about connecting to purpose is exactly what you said. There's a multiplier effect without diminution of anybody. And I actually feel, going on to the theme of ethics, that we each have at least one, but probably multiple purposes in our lives. And if we're failing to do everything that is within our power to be able to become that flame, to spread that light, to take those gifts and those experiences that each of us have had, and then to, as you just said, light tons of candles, make the universe brighter, then we've actually made a moral betrayal to the universe. And that's a very serious issue to me, one I take to heart. And part of why I feel so enthusiastic about this, because I do think that this moral imperative happens to merge with the potential for positive outcomes. The amount of flame, as you just indicated, that can come from a single candle is endless. That's enough to light up an entire universe. If we have the potential to be part of that happening and sit back and do nothing, part of the universe being darker is on our shoulders. And there's no other way around it.
So what are the barriers? What keep us from lighting our flame, or worse, sharing the flame that we have?
Sometimes I think that it is a lack of understanding of purpose, or a lack of belief as to what purpose might be. I always say, for me at least, the formula to finding purpose is to look at your gifts and your experience, almost bracket those, gifts plus experience, then multiply that times service. What are those gifts and experiences for that can provide meaningful service to the universe? Or perhaps services. And once you have that, you have purpose. You can begin to walk that journey down the purpose highway. By the way, I found that you complete that formula and you truly engage, it's almost like electricity goes through you. I used to not be all enthusiastic and excited and, ramped up and amped up like this. It wasn't until I felt truly connected to that purpose that suddenly, all of a sudden, that inner incandescence came through and started me shooting.
What was the spark for you?
A very personal experience.
Okay.
And one I'll share with you, actually.
Okay.
If you're comfortable with it.
Yes, sir.
If you are, then we are.
Thank you. I am very comfortable with it. And I like to, I don't, it's personal, but I like to share it because I think that maybe people can learn from it. I am on my fourth career. My third career was, as you mentioned earlier, co-owning a business. And at one point, my business partner and I agreed that we had different visions for the future of that company, and we had an amicable split. We also agreed that because his entire professional history had been in that particular industry, whereas I had had other careers before that, it would be best for me to be bought out and I'd be best positioned to move into something else. But I didn't know what that would be. And I was approaching a later part of my life and was thinking, okay, this time I need to figure out what it is and get it right. And I thought. I had been in business and I had been in every other professional situation in my entire life for one reason, and that was to climb the stairs of financial or status success. That's all I cared about. And for many years, I would even tell you all, I didn't even believe I had a soul. All I cared about, I was an empty vessel wanting to climb to the top. This time I felt, I don't even know how to begin that climb all over again. I had a appointment to go to that was at night in Harlem, which is, I live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. That is an easy bike ride away through Central Park, which I happen to live nearby. And it was, like I mentioned a few seconds ago, a nighttime appointment. I got on my bike and I started to ride through Central Park to get that appointment. At that time, I wore glasses, and that night it was raining. And as I was bicycling in the dark, in the rain, my glasses started to fog up. And as I was bicycling alone there with foggy glasses, drenched in the dark, I was thinking, how can I leverage my experience and my skills to get where I want to go? How can I cross that rainbow and get that pot of gold at the end this time? And for whatever reason, maybe because of the fogginess and the rain and the dark that was surrounding me, maybe it was some deprivation of senses, a thought popped into my mind out of nowhere. Scott, you're thinking about this wrong. You're thinking about how can I get where I want to go. Every thought I'd had about professional advancement was about Scott figuring out how he could get where he needed to go. And I realized in that moment, everything I had thought was wrong. Was wrong. Service was what I was missing. What could I do for others? And I will not lie to you or anyone who's watching this. I suddenly was overwhelmed with emotion. I started to cry. And there I was bicycling in the dark, in the rain, fog, with glasses I could barely see through, crying. Now, fortunately, I didn't crash into a tree. Otherwise, this story, you might be talking to a ghost, and the nature of this conversation would be quite different. But that was a turning point for me. And it's interesting because everything in my life suddenly, it was if by magic, began to shift. I began to attract different people. I began to think and view things differently. I began to approach every conversation differently. And it was almost like the universe whipped out a red carpet and rolled it my way. Opportunities, gifts, humanity itself came through, and my spirit emerged, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. That's the answer to your question, Doctor.
Wow, I got goosies. That was great.
Thank you.
That's really powerful. And
Wow.
it's, from a theological point of view, we believe that God gives us these moments.
Yes.
I guess it's not the right metaphor in this story to say the clouds parted, because it's more like the clouds surrounded you.
Yes.
But at that point, some people will take the message to heart and will act on it. And other people will just go right back to where they were.
Yeah.
And maybe, Doctor, you have some psychological insight on where these messages come from, or why some people respond to them and others don't.
I think one of the keys is what Scott demonstrated: humility. Instead of, just thinking about himself and that, and thinking, well, what else can I do? He suddenly opened up and said, what can I do for others? And he allowed himself to realize that maybe he'd been off the mark before. And none of us like to be right. I know Rabbi and I, when we argue, we're both just so right all the time, right? We don't want to be wrong. But in that moment, Scott, you opened up to the possibility that you could have had a V8 and you started all over and you claimed a whole new perspective, and I still have goosebumps, and you've been sharing it with everyone ever since. And I am glad, because we wouldn't have met you otherwise. So this is cool.
It's one of the gifts that choosing to walk down that road gave people like you. It's a huge gift. Connection with other human beings, meaningful connections. That's the theme of my podcast. That's the theme that I'm about. It's more precious than anything.
It is amazing. Well, what can everyone here do to make sure that they not only ride that purpose highway, but help others along their path? What can they do?
Understand a couple of things. First of all, I always say, speaking of other traditions, be Theseus, be the great Greek hero who opted to go on adventures to save others. Life, if you choose to take it, can be an adventure. We have to accept the ups. We have to accept the downs. The mindset of an adventurer, even if we're someone who is a little bit afraid, is one that can take us through the paths that we need to have in order to get the experience and develop the resilience that we need in order to begin to walk the pathway. That's number one. Related to that, I say, picture yourself, if you have this tendency of being in a comfort box. Comfort box is great because the superficial markers of familiarity, and this sort of goes as to what you two were talking about with your interactions with each other, have the ability to make it seem like you have connection. But when we exist socially within the comfort box, we keep ourselves from having the creative collisions and the deep, challenging conversations that can build real community once they're resolved. So the comfort box that we draw around ourselves creates the illusion of being surrounded with the reality of being alone. And finally, three, one thing that I think that you all do beautifully that I have seen so far, and talk about infectious, Rabbi. Talk about infectious. Build a circle of laughter. If it's not at the expense of others, if it's not putting other people down, but if it is really creating a shared sense of joy, that circle builds connection, community, a sense of inclusion, and helps make being Theseus a little bit easier as you walk down the pathways. And by the way, helps build you into a more strong and respected leader. People view those that have a good, appropriate sense of humor as both more competent and stronger leadership material generally.
I think humor is a great way for people to learn too. So if my Greek knowledge serves me, and it may not, Theseus was the guy that helped kill the Minotaur, right?
He was.
And remember, it was a red thread.
Yep, exactly.
I'm just saying.
In a maze.
A labyrinth. They, And so they went through the labyrinth, and he was able to navigate the difficulties, the dangerousness, because you talk about creating a safe environment.
Yeah.
So all of us have that safe thread, and the Rabbi been talking about it, and sometimes it's civility or the willingness to feel like we don't know what we're talking about because we're out of our, as you put it, out of our comfort box, right? Yeah. So I think that's wonderful. Rabbi, what have you got to say about that? I love that.
Well, this phrase that has come into our lexicon recently, safe spaces.
Yes.
a safe space, the way it's become used, is really a place of terror. We're terrified of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood or misinterpreted. And therefore, there's no kind of engagement, there's no passion, there's no growth. And all the, as you said, Scott, all the gurus are telling us we have to get out of our comfort zones. And why aren't we doing it? Because it's uncomfortable.
And dangerous.
Which
Because
of course is
people
the
will
point.
cancel us. Yeah. If we say something, like I said something about Hispanic women, well, luckily I'm Hispanic, so I was allowed to, but I got some grief for it. And what's interesting is we're so quick to judge everyone. If you choose a picture that has a Latin woman that looks this way, or a man that may look that way, or someone whose gender is fluid. And the question is, we're so quick now to not want to offend people that one way to do that is to cancel other people out. And we've talked about that quite a bit, the cancel
So you end up with a culture of fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I can share a quick story.
Please do.
I embarked on a unconventional course after college when I decided I was going to go hitchhiking across the United States. And my mother insisted I take a train for the first leg of the trip. She said, I don't want to find out that you were murdered 2 miles from home. I said, is it better to be murdered 2,000 miles from home? I don't know. But anyway,
apparently,
I took a train from Palm Springs, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. I spent the night in a campground, which is a story, different story for a different time. I woke up the next morning and I was absolutely terrified. The only thing on my mind was, what was I thinking? How did I ever come up with this wacky idea? And I was literally, frozen with fear. I just couldn't imagine going out and doing this. And what got me to do it was I had the foresight of telling everyone I knew what I was planning on doing.
Oh, the power of shame.
Exactly. The thought of slinking back with my tail between my legs and confessing that I'd given up before I even started. Nothing that could happen on the road could possibly be worse than that. And so this is a theme that I've come to use in my keynotes, is fight fear with fear.
Yeah.
We're all afraid, and sometimes for good reason.
Yeah.
But we can use our imagination to recognize other sources of fear, that we can balance it out, and we can recover a certain amount of control over our decisions, so that that initial fear doesn't drive us away from what we should be doing or drive us into things that we shouldn't be doing.
Wow. So Scott, from the time you had your soggy bike-ridden epiphany,
Yeah.
what were the next steps you took in this breaking out of your comfort zone, literally?
Yeah. I realized I needed to figure out exactly what the connection was between my gifts and service. And I decided also to do something that I'd never done before. One of the consequences of being raised in the milieu that I was, with the specific set of unusual demographic circumstances that I found myself in by nature of birth and other genetic disposition, was that I viewed the world as very hostile and combative. And I viewed it as not being particularly open to opportunities for someone like me. Look, my dad worked for the state. My mother worked for a dog food factory. There were not a lot of expectations for someone like me. My speech teacher told the entire class about me one time. You can teach a monkey how to talk, but you can't teach him how to speak. So it wasn't one of those things where everyone was saying, oh, Scott's going to go to Harvard one day. It was one of those things where expectations were nominal. And because of that, I figured that the only way that I could ever do anything was punch my way, was pile drive my way to where I needed to go through whatever obstacles were in the way. The idea of surrendering, of saying perhaps Providence had something for me in mind that I could submit to, a ride, having confidence in my abilities and gifts and their relationship to the providential forces that gave them to me. It just wasn't something that was in my mind. So I had to begin to trust that the providential river would let me go where I needed to be and to stop fighting currents that were pushing me in the opposite direction, along with accepting the fact that the road might not be one of my choosing, nor would be the timing, fully embracing that there were lessons that I would need to learn along the way. And that was what began to turn things, along with the idea of service, but that was how the process began to change.
Wow. Absolutely. Wow. That's just amazing.
It's a tough road, but yeah.
Yeah. And when you look back, probably many of us, when we look back, I know certainly your story, Doctor, doesn't start with a nice, easy, comfortable growing up. We look back and we see how blessed we've been for the struggles and the difficulties and the obstacles, things that we would never have asked for and would never have wished for and wouldn't wish on anybody. But having gone through them, we are so much stronger and better positioned to move forward than we would be otherwise.
That's absolutely true. My favorite Catholic priest during my confirmation, Father Juan Sosa, I knew him before he was a priest, so I could tease him. And once he became a priest, though, I couldn't call him Juan, just like I can't call the Rabbi Yonason. I call him Rabbi. I don't know. It's just how it goes. And he would say, again, God gave us our strengths so we could do his work. But he gave us our weirdnesses, our challenges, our foibles, our dislikes, our inabilities, so that we could find the path. And I think that that's true, because otherwise we don't, it kind of like steers us there. So I think so many people waste a lot of time trying to work on the things they're not good at and make them good, rather than ask the question you asked, which is, how do I connect service with my abilities? And I'm assuming by abilities, you're also talking about the abilities that aren't your top abilities. I mean, they're just the list of abilities. Yeah. So that's cool. What was the biggest challenge you faced, Scott Mason?
The biggest challenge that I faced was really understanding and accepting that the chartered waters were not there, and owning that it was up to me to be the one to take that staff, to strike the rock, and have the seas part in whatever way they chose to part. And it was up to me to then walk. Radical accountability as a concept, radical accountability. I will say, and by the way, on the podcast episode I did with the Rabbi, he talked about that in a way that was so compelling and so powerful. And that was part of why I felt such a connection with him during that episode, because I felt that was someone that gets it. We do need to be extreme about that. There were times in my career where I really did face discrimination or abuse or whatever other bad circumstances that we all face in our personal and professional lives, some more than others. And I think that I probably went through more than many people. So what? I have to and had to and accept going forward. I need to be accountable for every single one of them. Maybe I cannot control them happening. I can't control people doing things to me, although sometimes I can, more so than I would be willing to admit. A lot of times I can.
Well, say more about that. How can we control how people respond to us?
How are we walking into the room? What are we giving them permission to do? What subconscious signals are we sending? What are we saying that we'll tolerate? Are we afraid to sass back sometimes when really we need to? Are we firmly saying, I will take the consequences for not tolerating this? One time I had a boss I was nominated by a group of my peers to tell the commissioner of a government agency that I worked for that a decision that she wanted to make, an action that she wanted to take, had very dangerous consequences. And when I told her that in front of my staff and the people that had nominated me to talk to her, she said to me, Scott, you know, when you talk, you sound so stupid. If I were you, I would put a gun into my mouth and just shoot.
Wow.
On the one
Boy.
hand, right, I could say, and of course, many years I felt very, very angry about that. On the one hand, I couldn't have prevented it. On the other hand, perhaps if I'm to be truly radically accountable, if everyone was voting me to do this, well, maybe I should have examined why. My ego was the one that said, well, maybe I need to be the one out there doing that. Maybe I could have phrased it differently. Maybe the relationship that I had with her wasn't one in which she felt safe hearing this from me. Maybe I could have said, let's have a talk about this in private, please. Maybe I could have said, after she said that, maybe I could have done a little bit of street theater. Yeah, if you think I'm so stupid, I quit now. Or maybe I wouldn't have needed to be so dramatic. I could have just submitted my resignation privately and moved on. Maybe I could have said something to her, you know, I understand you might not like what I said, but you don't need to joke about me committing suicide. There were a zillion things I could have done. And it wasn't until years later that I chose radical accountability as a principle that I began to understand I needed to do something. I had failed. Does that make what she said right? Does that excuse it? Of course not. But does that mean that I took away my own power, my own agency? Did I limit the ability of myself to act in the spirit of motion on the gifts and things that I've been given? Did I own the fact that I'm Scott Mason? I was bringing a law degree, years of experience, strong social skills, and an organized mind into the table that had value for that company. I did not. I didn't. Moving forward, thinking about that every single time, wrestling with the angel that way, that's radical accountability, but it's the hardest thing to do.
It is. And speaking of radical accountability, I mean, the Rabbi and I always talk about courage and civility are two of the hardest parts of ethics. Something that you two gentlemen talked about the other day, I'm going to ask you to address. You address the issue of the LGBTQ plus elemental P is how I call it when I talk to all my friends who keep adding letters. And the rabbi being an Orthodox Jewish rabbi. And of course, you have radically different worldviews, and you both are very accountable. So, gentlemen, I want you to do what you said, what you've talked about before, which I loved how you did it. A civil conversation about foundational differences. Ready, set, go.
Well, if you don't mind, Scott, I'd like to make 2 points, and bear with me. I believe that there is a God who created the universe, who revealed his will at Sinai, and who holds us accountable for understanding and adhering to his will. This is not a belief I was raised with. I had no profound theological beliefs until I'd finished college, had done quite a bit of traveling, and I came to the beliefs that I now hold through logic, through study, through empirical evidence. I believe what I believe because I believe it is true. And it's not a leap of faith, it's a belief that I reached through reason. So when the Torah, when the Bible tells me something as an expression of God's will, I assume that God knows more than I do, that he's smarter than I am, and that he's wiser than I am. And so if there's something in his word that I don't understand, I assume the problem is with me and my understanding, not with him. Even if it may be difficult to grasp, even if it may make me or others feel uncomfortable. And I won't apologize for this, because I think this is foundational. And so when the Torah says, a man will not lie with a man, there's really no way around that. Second point, however, is that we live in a world where values, where beliefs that were once almost universal are now wildly diverse. And people grow up with all kinds of ideas, values, philosophies, influences. And we are, to a large extent, products of our environment, products of our experience. And traditional religion, traditional values is, they are in some cases under attack, in some cases not fashionable. And humanism, egalitarianism, open-mindedness, these have become values that have been elevated to the level of religion. So I can understand how good, sincere, well-meaning, intentioned people like yourself will come to beliefs that are polar from mine. And I don't have to compromise my beliefs to recognize that you are a person of integrity and sincerity, and that you truly believe in your own values. And that gives us common ground that we can be respectful to each other, that we can sit and talk and have a conversation, that we can feel a sense of partnership and kinship and friendship. One of the words we've talked about in the past is compartmentalization. It's a human defense mechanism where I've got one idea over here and one idea over here, and I can't let them get too close to each other because they don't play nicely together. And that's okay. And just dealing with this tension, managing it's not going to go away, but managing it, dealing with it, there are ways that we can have a civil and a healthy and in many ways a loving society, even with people who have very, very different foundational beliefs.
Scott?
Your witness, sir.
So much richness in everything that you say. We could be talking all afternoon.
We really
Heaven
could.
knows we ever do a live podcast where we all are in the same room. The podcast will probably never end. It'll be an eternal, it will be our own version of eternal life. It's interesting. I, like you, I actually grew up in a conservative Christian tradition. Fire and brimstone at church, hell, all this sort of stuff. Then I moved away from it. As I mentioned earlier, I went through a period, although I'll go into more detail about it right now because it's relevant. I actually went through a period where I was stone cold, hard. I would even say borderline, although quietly, militantly atheistic. When I said earlier, I didn't believe I had a soul, I meant it. I didn't think anyone had a soul, but I didn't have a soul. And those who believed they had a soul or a spirit, that was nice. I viewed you as someone that had psychological needs and you were weak. That's honestly how I viewed it. I have since, through a process, perhaps not so far unlike what the rabbi just described, lived experience, come to a very, very different place. I do believe I have a soul. And believing that, by the way, was one of the most transformative events in my life. And if someday we ever have a conversation about what it feels like to understand and believe you have a soul when you thought you had none,
I welcome that.
But we'll need some Kleenex that day. I will say that with that has come a commonality that I have with the rabbi, and that is that there is a larger universal force. I call it providence. Some might call it the cosmos of the universe. Some might even call it God. That is beyond our ability to imagine. If there is anything that I think about or any visual that I use to represent my knowledge space in the universe, I view myself as on a cliff. Very steep, but in front of me, a massive ocean. And the very edge of that cliff is all of the knowledge that I've accumulated in my life. And that ocean, which goes beyond and beyond and beyond, is everything there isn't to know. And by the way, that ocean is of infinite deepness. That, I would suspect, the rabbi and I have in common. We also, based on what I just heard, have a respect for facts, logic, and reason. Why do I raise all of that? Because irrespective of our beliefs about any particular point of view, and by the way, that includes those that strike most deeply at our heart, there are human elements of commonality. Now, not everyone believes we have souls, but I'm sure that person and I could find different things in common. But in this case, we have the commonality of some sort of belief in a larger force that's manifesting itself in the universe and that we are all part of and that's bigger than each of us. So if we're willing to acknowledge our common humanity, then it is, I believe, incumbent upon us to recognize it and respect it. There are some places a dialogue I have with you about fundamental human rights will not go. I may not like a certain group that's not hurting anyone. I may not believe a thing they have to say. I may think that they are completely ridiculous. I do not believe in genocide against them. I do not believe in persecuting them and depriving them of fundamental human liberties. Those are lines that I will draw. However, that doesn't mean that there's not openness to persuasion around the common humanity. I agree. We are in the comfort box of safety around conversation to our own detriment. Because what it does is it divides our humanity. It says some of us are us, some are others. And inevitably, words aside, the human condition is such that we prioritize us over them. So there's a hierarchy that automatically occurs within our humanity. And I do not believe any creative force in this universe would create human beings with the ability to think, all of whom, by the way, could be thinking that they're the favored ones, looking others down, and then just randomly pick one group to be right or the ones that are better. So I laid that as a foundational set of beliefs that I have right now. We live in a pluralistic world. That's the reality. Not everyone is going to agree with me about everything. And if you personalize every single belief, if I personalize every single belief, I'm going to run around not able to do anything because I'm going to be so wounded. No one agrees with you about everything. And honestly, sometimes the more personal those disagreements are, the stronger of an imperative I have to depersonalize them, so long as, again, they're not based in just, you're not even a human being, which I'm not hearing here. I actually agree with you about the biblical or the Torah language. It's pretty clear. It says what it says. There are those that make arguments, oh, this was about a different time, or it was talking about a particular sort of relationship between men, or it doesn't mention lesbians, so that doesn't count, all that sort of stuff. The language was what it was. It's very difficult to get around. However, that doesn't mean I have to accept it. That doesn't mean that I have to reject you for accepting it. Everyone doesn't have to agree with me. Everyone doesn't even have to like me. We could hate each other and still have great conversations and show respect. That's how society moves forward. I mentioned earlier, creative collisions, hard, difficult conversations. Those conversations, those collisions are not going to happen if we all agree. I view this as an exercise in my ability to hear things and consider and sharpen my own reasoning. If I'm to be perfectly honest, I couldn't sit back and don't believe in smugly sitting back and saying, well, I'm gay and that's who I am. And anyone who says that that's wrong, well, they just don't understand. No, I actually need to consider, are my fundamental belief systems about everything right? Everything. Am I really being honest with myself when I say I'm born this way? God wouldn't have made me, or the providence wouldn't have put this way if it didn't want me to be that way. If I'm not having that question, especially by someone who intellectually I respect it all, then that belief means nothing. A belief that means nothing and hasn't been tested ain't worth having. A relationship that doesn't test and challenge me isn't one worth having. I treasure this disagreement, and I don't have a problem with it. I would much rather honesty occur between us that can deepen the relationship and figure out how we can navigate that than the rabbi just pretending to say what he thinks everyone else wants to hear. There's been a lot of destruction in our society. I think a lot of racism and ugliness is coming out in our society in a way that's particularly toxic because people feel that they haven't had the space to honestly process how they're feeling. So they have to walk around saying this, that, and the other that they're supposed to say. And then the minute someone gives them permission to say something, the bile that's built up and fermented, boom, it blows up. And it's a lot uglier than it could have been if we would have just been willing to share the foundational beliefs and have conversations from there.
Powerful for both of you. The one thing that I see is maybe you guys can manage the differences and I can manage the differences. But what I see in social media and in this world is when we somehow can befriend somebody who believes in something totally different than what we believe, or even will befriend someone who's against, like Daryl Davis befriending the KKK, things like that. Sometimes our friends or other people are the ones to say, shame on you. How can you say you're proud and gay? Or how can you say you're a good rabbi if you befriend somebody? And I'm sometimes flabbergasted that is not the thinker, but sometimes there's supporters that are trying to keep them straight, keep them honest. And I don't mean gay and straight, but on the straight and narrow with their agenda, gaily forward, moving gaily forward in their agenda. And so I think that that's one of the things that the rabbi and I have been trying to work on, helping everyone, as you call it, radical accountability. We're talking about everyone think for themselves, not what other people want them to say. These borrowed ethics don't serve us well.
One of my modern day heroes is Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, Chief Rabbi of England, just passed away this year. He
passed away?
Just passed away from he was long battled with cancer. He was
I'm
72.
sorry.
If you're not familiar with him, please look him up online. There's just endless talks and lectures and discussions. He has an interview with Richard Dawkins. So you have Chief Orthodox Rabbi talking with one of the most prominent atheists of the generation, and they're actually friends. And somehow he was able to navigate that inconsistency. And the way you expressed it, Scott, was just so on target.
It was
is
beautiful.
that every human being is created in the image of God. And that means that every human being is deserving of basic respect. Mm-hmm. And, unless there are certain lines, but they're few.
Yeah.
And most of us haven't crossed them. Yeah. To consciously say, you say that, in the Jewish dietary laws, you can't mix milk and meat. Right? So there are two types of transgressors. There's a person who says, I like cheeseburgers. I'm going to eat what I like. And there's the other type who says, I don't like cheeseburgers, but I know God doesn't want me to eat one, and so I'm going to eat it. You don't have too many of those. Yeah. Most of us are trying to do the right thing. And many of us are doing a lot of good things, even if we may not agree with each other on every detail. And it doesn't mean I'm compromising my values. It means, as you say, we live in a pluralistic society, and that means I have to accommodate a lot of people who don't think my way. And I can manage that because principled compromise is a way that allows us to get along with one another, find the commonality, as you said, and build a healthier society.
I will also argue that the challenges facing our species in the foreseeable future are massive. As we all know, we are living in the middle of the most significant public health crisis of all of our lives so far, probably the last century. But anyone who thinks that this is the last time we're going to have a situation of this consequence, I will argue, is living in a fool's paradise. And not only that, but other challenges we have coming up may well be worse. We have got to, as a people, be able to do two things. Number one, connect so that the intellectual and creative capital that the human race has within it to be able to deal with these can be fully utilized. But number two, we have to be able to lead. Leadership is also, I believe, an ethical issue when faced with serious problems. If, though, we do not have a fundamental level of self-confidence, we cannot lead because we can't inspire any people. Don't follow. It's a fundamental human nature. They don't follow people that don't have self-confidence. And that means to me, having self-confidence in who I am and what my beliefs are. I have thought through my beliefs, and I'm just using myself as an example, but I have thought through my beliefs and I'm open to having them challenged and thinking through them again. Not only that, I am self-confident in who and what I am. And when you are truly self-confident, there is the ability to withstand arrows. You have resilience, and that means the resilience to be able to move on and not crumble if someone disagrees with you about something fundamental. I could reach back and say, Rabbi, you just said that you think the Torah says XYZ. Well, it does say XYZ. That's how you interpret it. And that means that you are homophobic and point fingers and be all indignant and find superficial power and drama in all of that. That isn't self-confidence. Self-confidence is saying that person believes what they do. That's cool. I'm not personalizing that. That's not about me. I know who and what I am in my core. Now let's move forward and fight this challenge. That to me is confidence. We need it. The stakes are too high.
Wow.
Bravo.
I'm flabbergasted. I'm not often, I don't get shut up very often, do I, Rabbi?
Not
Scott
often.
Mason, you shut me up.
I think I got a gold
Congratulations.
star today. Yeah.
My brother would say now I'm the perfect woman with ideas, but no voice. There you go.
That I disagree with.
Well, my brother when we were kids, now he's not that way. In fact, he married a wonderful woman with beautiful opinions. She's gladly will share with anyone. So that's good. Wow, you guys did good. I'm just so very excited. Here we have discussions about things that are world changing. So I'm going to ask everybody to be thinking about what they're going to do differently. Right now, here's what we do at this part of the show. Very soon, the rabbi will give us the word of the day. But Scott, is there one last call to action or word of wisdom you have for our global audience?
Build a better self. Build a better world.
How?
The future is now. How? Walk on that providential pathway. Find your purpose. Understand your skills, your experience, multiply it by service. Walk. Be Theseus. Don't be afraid. Build your comfort box. Rip it to shreds. And along the way, live in a circle of laughter.
That's powerful, sir. I'm going to repeat that. Build a better self, build a better world. The future is now. Live in a circle of laughter. I can't imagine it being any better than that. Was brilliant.
Thank you.
That was
To show
brilliant.
you just how people who are very different can focus in on the same ideas, one of my favorite memes is better yourself, better the world, better yourself.
Even better.
When we
Just
would
even
complain about others when I was a kid, my father would say, and what can you do to make this better? Let's forget about whose fault is this and you. And he would just say, ¿Y tú? So, okay, all right. This is so much easier to complain about someone else. I actually have to look at myself, really? That's a lot of work. But I think everyone now has a call to action. Rabbi, do you have a final, the word of the day, sir?
I do have the word of the day, which in fact is dictionary.com's word of the day, which I felt was particularly apropos for our conversation. The word is gorgonize. Gorgonize. So Scott, you mentioned Theseus. If I can remember back to junior high school mythology, I believe it was Perseus who went after Medusa.
Yes.
Now, Medusa was one of three sisters, and the three sisters were called the Gorgons. And if you looked at any one of them, wasn't a good idea. You would turn to stone. And so gorgonize means to hypnotize or petrify. And it occurred to me that we could think of gorgonize as maybe having a slightly different meaning as well. That if we look for the ugliness in people, if we look for the worst in people, then we petrify our own hearts. We paralyze ourselves. We make it impossible to have any kind of healthy relationship, find any kind of commonality. We simply shut the door and we promote the tribalism and we promote the acrimony and the animosity and the bellicosity. I've got my thesaurus out here and now I'm on a roll. One of the foundational principles of the sages is judge every person on the side of merit, give every person the benefit of the doubt. But you can read it a slightly different way. You could read it to say, give the whole person the benefit of the doubt. Look at the totality of the person, not just focus in on one detail, but see everything the person has to offer. Look at the person's history, look at the person's environment, look at everything that contributed to make the person who he or she is. And usually you'll end up finding that it's not that hard to see the good, to focus on the good, and to find the commonality for building a relationship that helps better ourselves and better the world. Doctor,
Wow.
Do you have a last word?
Oh, I always have a last word. Thank you, Rabbi. I wanted to thank first both of you. Yonason's a great co-host, and Scott, what a guest. I love your energy. I love your courage. I love your clarity. I put in the link here down there, your Purpose Highway. I urge everyone to listen to your episodes. But let's go back to the question each of us, I think, might feel compelled to skirt or to look at. And I tell everyone, I think you have the courage to do this. Let's look at what Scott had said. What are your experiences? What are your talents? Let's add Father Juan Sol says, what are your glitches, the things you're not good at, the things that stop you? And then multiply it by service. And are you where you need to be? And before you ask too many of your friends, take a moment to think about it by yourself. Because parts of courage is to really look at things when we're on a bike in Central Park with our eyes foggy, we're soaking wet, and we're suddenly struck with a thought. So get yourself uncomfortable and let the thought strike you, just as Scott Mason and the Rabbi and I tried to do. That's all I have to say. And check out thepurposehighway.com. The episodes there are great. Start with Yonason's episode. If you just go in there and research this, I think it's about faith. What was the title, Scott, for the one with the Rabbi?
I want to say the future of faith, but
Future
it may
faith,
be,
sorry.
it is under, his name is plainly listed. So
Yeah, I knew it had something to do with faith, but go and check it out. And I urge everyone, go forth and be proud of yourselves and be brave and accept who you are. And you can change the world and meet this challenge. And I believe that we all can do that. So
Amen.
I say to you gentlemen, goodbye. I say to the audience, thank you once again. Please join us next Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern for another episode of The Rabbi and the Shrink. Adios y gracias por todo.